Welcome to Fulbright PULSE, the podcast where we keep the spirit of international exchange alive, share stories of curiosity, creativity and cultural experiences from the Fulbright community. I'm your host, Jonas, and today we are publishing a very special episode. It's December 1st, 2025, World AIDS Day, and we are honored to speak with someone whose leadership embodies the Fulbright mission of dedication oneself to the public good through international understanding. Our guest is Anne von Fallois, Chair and CEO of the Deutsche AIDS-Stiftung, Germany's foundation for HIV and AIDS prevention. Anne's career has spanned government, consulting and civil society, but it all began with a transformative year as a Fulbright Scholar at George Washington University in 91 and 92. Today, exactly 2 years after she took the helm of the AIDS Foundation on World AIDS Day 2023, we are exploring her journey and the ongoing fight against HIV, stigma and discrimination. But before we begin the full conversation, here are some highlights from our talk, starting by Anne sharing us some insights of her Fulbright year in Washington, D.C.
Academically, I learned so much. I was really impressed by the quality of my professors, had an internship on the Hill. It changed my life personally because I made so many friends. I would say that I still profit from what I learned and experienced in those days.
We talked about the devastating impact of recent funding cuts on HIV programs like UNAIDS and PEPFAR, especially also what Anne witnessed during her visit in South Africa.
I was there in May, and that was in a time where a lot of people and a lot of organizations didn't really know how the fight against HIV should go on. The United States has been the biggest funder of HIV countermeasures.
Anne shared her perspectives on what foundations are and why they matter for democracy and civil society.
Well, foundations are a cornerstone of a vivid civil society. We are here to fund things, we are here to invent new things, we are here to try out things without already being tightened by too much regulation and too little funding.
And finally, Anne had a powerful message for Fulbrighters.
Yeah, I just want to remind us Fulbrighters that we have a job to do in these challenging times. If we are not fighting for transatlantic friendship, who else is going to do it?
Without further ado, let's jump into the episode. Welcome to Fulbright PULSE, the podcast that keeps the spirit of international exchange alive. The Fulbright program is built on the idea that cross-cultural understanding can inspire individuals to dedicate their lives to the public good, and it plants a seed that can grow into a career of impact, leadership, and service. Today, we have a guest who truly embodies that principle. She's a leader who has navigated through the corridors of government, the world of strategic consulting, and is now chair of one of Germany's most vital public health organizations. We are honored to be joined by Anne von Fallois, the CEO and chair of the Deutsche AIDS-Stiftung, which is the German foundation for HIV and AIDS prevention. And we will be talking about her journey, the fight against HIV and stigma, and how the seeds of international exchange can shape a lifetime of dedication. Anne, a very warm welcome to Fulbright PULSE.
Thanks for having me, Jonas, and thanks for the kudos.
You're welcome. Anne, thank you so much for making the time for us. Your career is incredibly impressive, and we are planning to publish this episode on the 1st of December in 2025, which is the World AIDS Day. And you took over the leadership of the German AIDS Foundation on December 1st, 2023, so exactly 2 years ago. Was that timing intentional, or what did that symbolic date mean for you as you stepped into this crucial new role?
It was indeed only a coincidence, yet I took it as a good sign because World AIDS Day reminds us of all those who lost their lives to HIV and AIDS, and it reminds us that the fight against HIV and AIDS is not over. So I took it as an inspiration and a sign of responsibility for my job ahead. And that's why I'm happy that I started this new job on December 1st.
Okay, very good. But before we dive deeper into your current work, we'd love our listeners to get to know you and get to know what Fulbright context you have. You've been at George Washington University, if I remember that right. Could you take us back to the days of your Fulbright experience? When was it? What did you study? And how did you end up at Fulbright?
Yeah, that was my Fulbright year was 91, 92. I studied international affairs at the Elliott School at GW, George Washington University in Washington, D.C. I was very happy to receive a Fulbright grant, and I ended up applying for one because a friend of mine had already been in California with the Fulbright grant, and he advised me that that would be the best I could achieve, and that's why I applied, and I was lucky to receive a grant.
In what ways did that Fulbright experience in the US shape your character and also lay the foundation for your career path, looking back now?
It was indeed a life-changing experience. Academically, I learned so much. I was really impressed by the quality of my professors, the interest they took in my thoughts, my work. I had fantastic co-students. That too was an inspiration. And I could do a lot of research for my master's thesis coming up. So academically, that was very rewarding. Professionally, it was very rewarding because after my studies, I had an internship on the Hill. I worked for a congressman, and I even got the chance to publish a paper for the subcommittee on Europe and learned a lot about the ways on the Hill, the democratic structures of the United States. And I was able to compare that to my work for a German MP back in Bonn. So that was indeed very insightful. But most importantly, it changed my life personally because I made so many friends. And I mean, if you probably you won't remember, but 91, that was the first he day of multiculturalism. People were discovering, celebrating, defending their hyphenated identity. And I had friends who were Asian American, African American, European American. I myself learned that I was Caucasian. So ultimately, I really learned a lot about changing perspectives, celebrating identities. But already at that time, people were discussing to what extent it was good to celebrate diversity, without seeing the dangers of disintegration and disuniting. That's what we're seeing right now, but for other reasons. So, wrapping it up, my Fulbright year really changed my life. And I would say that I still profit from what I learned and experienced in those days.
If there are people listening at Fulbright right now, I'm sure they will be incredibly proud of you saying that. And I feel like that is something that most of the people, or if not all of the people who experience any Fulbright grant, may it be a teaching assistancy, may it be a fellowship or a study program abroad, they do feel like or can closely relate to what you just said. Now, continuing your path to current leadership and your job at the foundation, well, your background is so unique, spanning the government, public sector consulting at Kienbaum, where you have led the group public and non-government, and now civil society. Could you maybe give us some more background on what you did, for example, in during your time at consultancy? That was quite a long time in your career, if I have that correctly in mind.
Yeah, I spent 10 years in consultancy, actually. I was an executive search consultant. So what I did was I looked for future leaders, and I try to help to develop future leaders. And in doing that, I think I was really helped by what I'd learned about myself, about people, whilst I was living in the United States. So to that extent, my Fulbright experience also catered to my consultancy career.
Mhm. And besides the consultancy, you also worked at the Office of the Federal President of Germany. Was that before the consultancy or afterwards? How do all of these career steps relate to each other?
Yeah, I spent actually the first 2 decades of my career in the Federal President's Office. I started as the executive assistant to the then First Lady, and I ended up as the head of the domestic department. And in that role, I was a political appointee, and political appointees can lose their job once political or other circumstances change. So that's why I left the Federal President's Office, which was really, to some extent, my home, and to some extent still is. I had a terrific time there. But then I went into consultancy. I enjoyed that too. But since I'm a very strong believer in the principle of the revolving door, I thought after 10 years at Kienbaum, this consulting firm, that it was time for a change yet again. And then I started my job here as in an NGO. I think it's a good idea to switch careers, to get experience and put your hallmark on institutions and organizations in different systemic settings. And that's why I'm really glad that I had the chance to reinvent myself yet again 2 years ago.
I did have to think about one member of the German parliament who was with the parliament during the last legislation period, but now also switched roles again to the it was not the public, but the private sector. And I then wonder how different is it to work like in these settings from consulting? I imagine it is very different from working at the presidential's office to then jump back to the foundational work. How different is that kind of working environment really, and how easy is it to adapt to these circumstances?
To me, it was pretty easy because when I changed from the Federal President's Office, I joined a company that is family owned, that is mid-size. So it's not one of these consulting firms where the elbows are rather sharp and people fend constantly for jobs and monetary success. Let's put it that way. But yes, the experience in consulting, of course, was shaped by this notion of you have to work to meet your KPIs. And when I'm talking about KPIs, of course, I'm talking about financial goals, business success. That really was a difference. But it was good to change perspectives on what goals are and to sort of rethink the way you want to impact things. But I have to say, I'm glad that now I'm again working for a cause that's bigger than myself and bigger than the check I get at the end of the month. So that's why I'm really happy here at the Deutsche AIDS-Stiftung.
We will come back to the work at the foundation in a minute, but still speaking about consultancy, right now I have the feeling that consulting is becoming increasingly popular as a career entry point. And as somebody who has worked in consultancy but not done that directly after your master's, do you think that it's a good idea to start the career in consultancy immediately? Or would you rather recommend people who are just doing the Fulbright grant to maybe go for a different kind of course, that's highly personal and very specific, but are there any general tips you could or thoughts you could share?
I have really mixed feelings. On the one hand, working for a consulting firm at a very early stage of your career can be a great experience because you get to work on many projects under high pressure. You really have to perform. That is an experience that shapes you as a professional. But at the same time, I sometimes ask myself, how can people consult people and organizations, companies on issues that they have actually no personal knowledge of and no experience of their own with? So in a way, I always thought when I met young consultants, well, what do you know? um, and at this point of time, I have the feeling that it's gotten much harder for young people to enter consulting because a lot of those junior jobs are now done by AI. So it's going to be really tough to get a good job in a consultancy. So you can try, and it'll be a rewarding experience. But still, ultimately, one should also look whether or not the grass is not greener on the other side of the career end.
I see. So, as you've settled into your role as chair of the German AIDS Foundation, what have you identified as your top strategic priorities for the foundation over the next few years? Or maybe before we start with that, could you give us an insight on what the foundation is doing in the day-to-day business and what your goals are?
hmm The Deutsche AIDS Foundation was funded in actually almost 40 years ago, and we do national work and we do international work. On the national level, we invest in care for people living with HIV. We fund projects that help people living with HIV to stay true to their therapy and to stay engaged in society. We have housing projects where people living with HIV can find housing and consulting. We also invest in preventive projects where we try to reach vulnerable groups that cannot be easily reached by offers of healthcare and prevention. Internationally, we fund projects in sub-Saharan Africa and in Ukraine because that's where the infection rates are still high and that's the sad story, probably rise due to the disengagement of major donors and the cuts in HIV funding.
Wow, I have to think about that because I wasn't aware, for example, that Ukraine is also a big hotspot for these issues. I knew about Africa, for example, and I also know about the situation in Germany because I'm also like part of one of those vulnerable groups who are taking also like the PrEP medicine. And now, coming back to my question earlier, what are your top strategic priorities for the foundation over the next few years, and how do you lead that organization?
First and foremost, we really need to remind people that HIV and AIDS is not over. Because here in Europe, many people think, well, that's no longer a danger. We have terrific medicine. People living with HIV can really live a rather normal life with this really great antiretroviral medication. But still, we need to remind people that HIV can be prevented. It cannot be cured, but it can be, there is an effectful therapy. So we need to remind people in Europe of this. We need to remind people living in Europe that people who live with HIV or are endangered by it are not to be discriminated against, but are, in our midst. And we need to show solidarity and we need to minimize stigma and discrimination. And internationally, we still have high infection rates, especially amongst young women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. We need to help them defend themselves against sexual exploitation. We need those living with HIV to have access to medication and to be able to stay true to their therapy. And when it comes to Ukraine, where infection rates have been high already before the war, we have to help Ukraine in that struggle against HIV under the circumstances of war and migrating, being displaced. So there's a lot of work to do there.
Could you paint us a picture of what your experiences look like when you visit these regions in, for example, Kenya and Cape Town? Who's helping the people on the ground there? Is it people from the Deutsche AIDS Foundation, or is it people locally that you train, for example, with
Mhm.
prevention measurements?
We work with local partners, and that's usually local NGOs who work in health centers, who work with communities, who make sure that people who live with AIDS, with HIV, or are vulnerable to it, that they can be reached and accompanied. We have long-standing partners in Sub-Saharan Africa, and I was there in May, and that was in a time where a lot of people and a lot of organizations didn't really know how the fight against HIV should go on. The United States has been the biggest funder of HIV countermeasures, and almost overnight, the current administration decided to considerably change the policies without really making it clear where that should end. So up to this day, there is so much insecurity amongst the people in Sub-Saharan Africa because they cannot really be sure that their medication will still be there in a couple of months. So what we do right now is to ensure at least those who are supported and catered to by the projects we invest in, that these people really feel safe and secure, stay true to their therapy. But fear, uncertainty, that's really troubling at this point. And fear and uncertainty always lead to more infections.
Is there any key moment or a story from your visits that stuck to your mind or that reaffirmed you with the why of your work, if you want to share that?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Kenya, I met with families who live in very rural regions of northern Kenya. And sometimes there are families where the mother is infected, the three children are infected. They have to travel for more than 2 hours to reach their health center where they get their medication, where they get food supplies. And yet they don't give up. They have so much dignity and so much happiness in their lives that really impressed me. And it really impressed me to see with how much professionalism and warmth at the same time they are being cared for by the people in those health centers we support.
I love to hear that, and it completely underlines the importance of your organization. To bring the focus back to Germany, while great progress has been made here, challenges remain, including the rising infection rates among certain groups. For the foundation's perspective, what is the most urgent issue in the fight against HIV within Germany right now?
Mhm. I think we all are experiencing that the societal climate is cooling down, and it is a lot easier to be aggressive, discriminative, abusive against people who belong to minority groups. And we really have to defend what we've achieved. A society that is to a great extent showing solidarity, that is accepting diversity, if not celebrating it. And these are values that are endangered right now. And we really all have to defend these values because there's much to lose, not only for those at the margins, but for all of us.
Well, if you speak about for all of us, I have to think about the German parliament because they are representing all of us. And you are also a registered lobbyist. You engage directly with policymakers, like members of the German parliament, the federal government. Also, our current Minister of Health, Nina Wagen, is in the board of trustees of your foundation. And for example, the former president of the German parliament, Rita Süssmuth, is the honorary chairman. So when you speak to people like Nina Wagen, for example, or Karl Lauterbach in the prior administration, how do you engage with them? What do you tell them? How is your work with politicians looking like?
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned Rita Süssmuth. She's still the biggest source of inspiration, I think, for all of us, because she once framed this sentence that we fight against the illness or the disease and not against the people suffering from the disease. So that still is that is her legacy, and we are trying to fulfill that. When it comes to advocacy right now, I have two main goals right now. On the national level, we are lobbying for intensive testing. We want more testing so that those approximately 8,000 people in Germany who don't know about their status as an HIV positive person know that they are living with HIV and that they can be helped. Internationally, we try to lobby as hard as possible for the resources needed for the international fight against HIV. That addresses the Global Fund. That is one of the principal financial mechanism for financing that fight. And we also support UNAIDS. UNAIDS is under severe pressure because in the scheme of remodeling or refirming the United Nations, it has been decided that UNAIDS is to sunset already by the end of next year. We think that's too early. Because it doesn't make sense to sunset an organization that has such an important task at this point of time. Whilst everything is changing, whilst everything is breaking down to some extent, we really need UNAIDS as an anchor of stability and as an anchor of orientation. So that's what we are also lobbying for.
I did not know that UNAIDS is still to be set down already next year. And probably, as we have mentioned the US administration in the talk already, do you still, what do your contacts to the United States look like? What is their role? And what do they think about the current measurements by the Trump administration?
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, we really have to applaud the United States for having funded the fight against HIV for so long with such great sums. There was a special program, and it's still in existence, called PEPFAR, initiated by George Bush and really supported bipartisanly on the Hill. And first, we really feared that PEPFAR would be gone forever, but there is still at least some PEPFAR left. And we really hope that the bipartisan support for PEPFAR will carry the program into the future. But what we're seeing right now is that with the devolution of USAID, programs that supported community-based approaches in the fight against HIV are no longer funded. While I was in South Africa, I learned that the the monitoring of the infection was financed by USAID, the database and the people putting the data into the database. So that ultimately the health minister of the province of Western Cape told me, well, we are practically in blind flight. We don't really know what's going on because we no longer have the data. And people doing research in the field of HIV in South Africa all of a sudden didn't have any funding. And because they were funded, or they were supposed to be funded by the United States, and they had sort of pre-invested in their research projects, sometimes over like 2 or 3 years, because they were given a grant. But now that grant is not valued any longer. So there they stand without any money left, and with all the investment already made into the research. So what we are currently really observing is, well, a roller coaster of information. One day we are pulling out entirely. Next day we are still funding PEPFAR, but we are no longer funding community work. We are no longer funding anything that has something to do with contraceptive measures, with birth control. We are no longer funding anything that has the word gender in it. Oh my God. Yeah, I think it's really a roller coaster of information and experience right now.
I absolutely understand. And speaking about gender, we had the same problem in the Fulbright Association. So whenever we want to have some kind of event and get funding by the US offices here in Germany, for example, for evening events, then, well, we need to really think about how we phrase that, and if there's some kind of gender-related topics or not very national interest level of what Trump supports, we do also not get the funding for that. And we, from a German perspective, are like, wow, that is really impacting our work. And now I do hear from you that it's also impacting you on a more global level. While the global Fulbright mission is to fundamentally foster mutual understanding to solve global problems. How do you see that spirit reflected in the international partnerships you're currently building with the German Deutsche AIDS Foundation, which often bridge Europe, Africa, and other parts of the world?
Yeah, I mean, we really focus on grassroots partnerships. We do business with partners on the ground. We don't do business with governments. In that respect, we are not challenged. But in general, I'm really, yeah, I really have strong feelings about this backlash when it comes to multilateralism, when it comes to, well, the rule of law, an understanding of values shared. And among those values definitely is freedom of speech and freedom of expression. That is no longer, it cannot be taken for granted any longer. And that really gives me nightmares.
What do you tell current Fulbrighters being in the United States? Is there anything you want to give them as a tip or from your experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, the guy in the Oval Office isn't the United States, but neither are the liberal elites on the East or on the West Coast. So it's so very, very important that we continue to speak with each other, that we really try to understand what's going on in our countries, in our societies, in our minds. And that needs an attitude of, I'm really curious about you, without any, stereotype. I just want to understand what's in your mind. And that's really something that we need to learn again. We need to learn to listen. We need to be able to change perspectives, but we also need to draw a line where we probably have to say, well, agree to disagree. And that might happen.
Speaking of disagreement, your foundation is well known for things like high-profile fundraising events, which can, for an outsider, seem very glamorous, and everybody has these nice dresses and suits up. How do you balance that necessity for these large-scale public events with long-term, often less visible program investments on the ground, as you just discussed?
Well, one doesn't go without the other. We are not doing the events because we like to dress up and listen to great opera, which is a nice perk at the side. But we're doing these events to fundraise and to raise awareness and to set signs of solidarity. When there is an opera event in, let's say, Berlin, and people from the midst of society dress up to show the red ribbon and their solidarity with people living with HIV, that is a strong, strong sign. And in doing that, we remind people of the ongoing necessity of support and solidarity. And we remind people that HIV is a topic that belongs, and people living with HIV belong in the midst of society and not on the margins.
For listeners who may not be as familiar as you with the day-to-day realities of HIV, let's say they do see something in the media, in any publication about your opera event, and they maybe have some misconceptions about HIV and AIDS. Is there anything that you would like to debunk once and for all in this podcast, which might be a big misconception?
Well, first of all, HIV is not AIDS. HIV is the infection, and AIDS is an illness that might develop when the HIV infection isn't being cared for. But that is absolutely feasible. These days, the medication is so good that the virus load goes so deep that you can actually no longer really see the virus in the blood. And that's why somebody who is under therapy cannot give the virus to others, even in sexual intercourse. So there's no need to be afraid of people living with HIV. There's every means to prevent an infection. We do have, well, the prevention measures that we all know about, condoms, but we also have very, very good medication that is preventive. We even now have, and that really is a game changer, a preventive injection that, given twice a year, protects you against an HIV infection, almost like a vaccination. And that really is a game changer, especially for young women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa who cannot fend for themselves, who really need to be protected. So we have all the means to care for somebody living with HIV and to prevent infections. And there's no need to be afraid, but there's also a lot of reason to keep fighting.
I didn't know, first of all, that there's this kind of injection that you can have. I knew about the pills that you can take every day to prevent HIV from being exchanged between persons. But from user perspective, that is way easier to give a biannual injection than having, for example, these sub-Saharan girls to take pills every day, right? How are
Exactly.
these perceived?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really almost like a vaccination. I mean, if you are a girl living in a township in South Africa, she is a lot better off when she's given an injection twice a year than taking a pill every day, when people might think that that is stigma. What is she doing? Why is she taking a pill? Is she ill? Is she infectious? Oh my God. So this is a lot better. We really think that this can be a game changer in the fight against HIV, and that's why we lobby hard that the rollout of this new long-acting prevention medication is as effective as possible.
Can we talk about numbers? Because I have no clue about what this medication is costing, for example. Maybe you have some insights for us. As if
Mm-hmm.
we want to donate, we have the Christmas time upcoming. That is usually the time where people donate the most. How much is one donation of, let's say, 100 euros giving you in sub-Saharan African countries for prevention?
Mm-hmm. Okay, this injection thing, there are currently negotiations going on with the pharma company who's developed this game changer. And last year, everybody thought, well, this is going to cost like $40,000 a year. But by now, the company and major players such as UNAIDS and the Gates Foundation, they have come up with a scheme where the company is compensated for giving the licenses to produce the drug on a very cheap basis. So ultimately, we all hope that like a shot will be $40, or even two shots will be $40. But we will not ourselves invest in those in the medication. We will invest in the structures that make sure that young girls know about this possibility and can be administered this injection without feeling abused, or with the knowledge of what they're doing. That's what we will invest in.
Also coming back to Germany, because there are other groups which are affected by that disease and that infection. For example, the gay community. What are you doing for them from a foundational perspective?
Mm-hmm. First of all, we are investing in programs that cater to groups that can be reached only with difficulties. And that is migrants, gay migrants who come to Germany, sometimes for the first time can really sort of live out their sexual orientation. We support meeting groups, and we support groups. We support exchange of experience and meetings and we work together with local AIDS-Hilfen, because they're doing the field work. And we are very happy that we have a lot of gay people who actually support our work, even within our boards. So it's a two-way street. On the one hand, we try to help gay people living with HIV or being endangered by it to protect themselves, and on the other hand, we are happy that we get support from the community.
That's great to hear, especially that you have people from the communities in your board. But now, not everybody can sit in your board. So, what can a single person do to prevent HIV as a person themselves in their friendship circle, in the family?
Mm-hmm. First of all, it's attitude. Don't have any fear. If you want to show solidarity, wear the red ribbon on December 1st, World AIDS Day. Of course, we are always happy when people attend our functions or donate. But most importantly, we really look for people who stand up for a society that cherishes diversity and acts up against those who don't respect different ways of life. And I think that's the most important thing that we can all do, and we all need to do. Stand up for the society and the values we believe in.
Thank you for these words. They do touch me, and I hope also our listeners and wherever they are currently. Just one small thought that came to my mind while you spoke. We do have also in Germany quite big differences. I think in Eastern Germany and the west of Germany, like the South, Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia, Hamburg, where I'm, the big cities, Berlin. That's quite different to Eastern Germany, where I grew up, for example, where being part of these minority groups is still a big issue, and people do not really care or don't speak about because they think it's not normal. What would you tell somebody being part of that groups?
Yeah, that's really a tough question because acting up and standing up is a lot more difficult in a surrounding
Indeed,
where
yes.
a lot of people don't cater to don't subscribe to the idea of a diverse society. And that holds true in some parts of Eastern Germany, holds also true in some provincial parts of Western Germany. It really is difficult to act up, but nevertheless, we have to do it, because if we don't do it, then we leave the field for those who want a different, a uniform society. And yeah, I think sometimes it's really good to look for allies, to think with whom can we join forces to fight for our idea of living together in a village. And sometimes you might be surprised to find people supporting you and what you're aiming for, and you would never have expected that. So don't give up, even if it's difficult.
I see. So also networking is a big part of that, looking for allies. And that is, of course, something that you can do by social media way easier today. And also with the rise of organizations like yours, that's becoming way easier. So I hope we have positive development in that direction. But I wanted to come slowly coming to the end, speak about foundations in general with you, because now you're leading one of those big associations, which might be something people don't really know about, or they don't really know how to engage with those. Maybe also some people say, well, a foundation, that's something which families do to reduce taxes or something like that, which might be a myth, might be not. I don't know. You can tell me. Um, when talking about foundations in general, I have a very positive feeling about it because I got scholarships from a political foundation. I got the Fulbright grant. I'm speaking to you right now. But for people where foundations are maybe something not part of the daily lives, how would you tell them about foundations also in different ways of the society? How can they be described?
Mm-hmm. Well, foundations are a cornerstone of a vivid civil society. In a way, we are I would consider foundations as a yeast in a vivid society. We are, we are here to fund things. We are here to invent new things. We are here to try out things, without, well, without already being, tightened by too much regulation and too little funding. So I think that foundations really play a major part in societal progress, but we need to play that role and really understand ourselves as being vivid and not, you know, big fat cats lying in on the sofa. So and that is something we still can and should learn from the United States, that civil society is a corrective, is can produce services, attitudes that really have the common good and the democratic good in mind. So I'm still, with all the setbacks, inspired by the strength and the power of civil society in the United States, and I won't give up that idea.
In the United States, we do very often, for everyone who has been in the United States, the thing that, for example, museums or libraries are always named after the person funding them or the foundation funding them. Is that something we also need in Germany, in your opinion?
I think we already have that at some in some cases and some places. I talk to donors quite often. Some like the idea of having a scholarship program named after them or a room. Some say, well, I just want to stay in the shadow. I just want to give the money. I think we should be open for that. We should not, sometimes you hear this criticism. Oh my gosh, this rich person is buying him or herself this and that. But, I would really look on this with this view. These are people who think that their wealth, can do something good. And they do that by investing in a foundation, in funding a foundation. And we should celebrate that and not criticize that.
I think that's wonderfully wrapping up also what you told us during the time in the podcast about your foundation, what you do, how your impact is being seen in the world and in Germany as well. Is there anything we have not yet talked about that you want to tell our audience?
Yeah, I just want to remind us Fulbrighters that we have a job to do in these challenging times. We are a cornerstone of transatlantic relations, and we really have to live up to that. It's difficult. There's so much disappointment right now and so much disbelief or irritation. But nevertheless, if we are not fighting for transatlantic friendship, who else is going to do it? And there is still so much that we have in common, that we can learn from each other, that we can do together. And we need to believe in that, and we need to do it.
Anna, thank you so much for this incredible, insightful, and inspirational conversation. Your journey truly shows how personal dedication, strategic vision, and the spirit of international cooperation, democracy, freedom can come together to tackle some of our world's most significant health issues, which is HIV and AIDS and other challenges that arise with that. And for me, the key takeaway of our conversation is not really, well, how do I phrase it? It's more the passion that I took from you, listening to your stories, what you told us during the conversation. I really thank you for that, giving us the possibility to hear and see how the reality on the ground and you're shaping the policy at home works together with the international relationships. That was quite new to me. And for that, big thank you to you.
I have to thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fulbright PULSE. We hope Anna's story inspired you, not just about the fight against HIV and AIDS, but about what it means to dedicate your career to the public good and defend the values of solidarity, diversity, and mutual understanding. If you liked this episode, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue sharing the diverse voices of the Fulbright community. And we want to hear from you. If you have recommendations for future guests or stories that should be shared on Fulbright Pulse, drop us a message at podcast@fulbright-alumni.de. We are always excited to hear from our community. Until next time, take care, stand up for what you believe in, and stay curious.